que vean posibilidades y la resistencia al cambio de institución.
10 minutos, comenzamos ahora.
Y la estructura de lo que es la universidad, porque el problema también yo veo que es en gran parte la estructura.
Ok,
¿Vamos para inglés?
sí, es tiempo para las preguntas. Aunque sientan que no se escucha en todo el salón, necesitan el micrófono para que se escuche en el audio del streaming. Así es que cualquier tipo de pregunta o comentario, ahora es el momento.
Bueno,
So any questions?
we were talking about the problem with the resistance for change. Specifically, I mean, it was interesting because here there are people who teach at the elementary, university, and school level,
Right.
and they feel that there's a lot more innovation at the school level than at the university level, or that these changes are being accepted a lot easier at that level than at the university. Now, talking about the resistance, is part of the problem the structure of the university itself?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's the structure of the university, but what's interesting though, and this is a perspective I often encounter. I mean, if you look at a researcher in a university, they're always using new technologies, right? I mean, that's how you advance their field. So they're very active with using technology for their research. They haven't quite always made the jump in using that for their teaching. Right, so sometimes you get the impression people will talk about how universities don't change and this and that, and that's a bit false because universities change enormously in terms of knowledge production. They're always pushing the boundaries of knowledge within their discipline. But the failure, I think, has been in terms of applying those same attitudes to the instruction process rather than just to the research within their discipline. And I think that's why we see a bit of a pushback in it, because a lot of faculty researchers would prefer to spend time in research activity because that's where they get rewarded, that's where they get their recognition. So I think that's one of the challenges in that regard. But there's some systems I've noticed that are starting to develop a scholarship of teaching, like a teaching dossier, where when you go for tenure, not just your research and publication, but also your teaching performance is included in that as well. So there are some mind shifts that are happening there, but particularly with technology, there's two approaches that are critical. One is you do need top-level support. You need, especially if you're going to roll it out system-wide, because someone had to decide to put a projector in a classroom, someone had to decide to get screens on a wall, someone had to allocate funds for wireless internet connection. But what happens is there's a lot of innovation that faculty engage in at a classroom level. They might try on their own blogs and Twitter and Facebook in a classroom. There's always pockets of innovation in a university, but it doesn't get communicated to the right levels. Yesterday when I was having lunch, we were talking about this in a university setting, and I said, the difficulty is if you go to a university president and you say, what are the most fascinating, innovative teaching practices in your university? I don't think most of them would know. But if you say, what are the most fascinating research projects going on at your university? Oh, they would say, oh, you know what? Jane is doing this and Bob is doing that. So the culture values innovation in research, not innovation in teaching.
You just answered my question. Is that how are we going to get this information from each student so we could organize or plan or produce or tell them what they're good for? And is this going to be merely Facebook or social networks, or we're going to have a specific personal learning environment that we see and then we tell them what they're good for, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I think we want to be very careful. You don't want to profile students because even though we might have certain natural attributes, I think nothing is more important than passion, right? So, I might naturally, let's say, have attributes toward mathematics or toward physics or towards, chemistry, but I might have a huge passion for a field that I'm not aligned to. And so I think it's important that we don't use our systems to filter people into chutes that they don't have the passion to be in. So I think that'd be the first criteria. But there's a lot of techniques, even now. I mean, most universities do some kind of pre-application screening. I know some systems, especially ones that have high enrollment demands but limited, acceptance, they do augment their student enrollment searches with social media activities. So they'll do a Facebook search and a YouTube or whatever to see what have you done online that's going to embarrass our university. So that's already happening. But I don't think it's that critical that we have a full understanding of a student when they get there, because some K-12 systems have people produce portfolios, which can be very effective. Some students travel internationally for a year and gain extraordinary experience that the K-12 system didn't capture before they took time off and went to the university. That's not captured. Unless they kept a portfolio or blogs or stuff, we wouldn't know that. So what's important isn't that we fully understand students before they get there. What's important is that we have a system in place that allows us to come to understand them once they're there. And that we don't use that as a means for pushing them in a direction that they're not personally passionate about.
I have a question regarding time.
Time?
Time is a scarce resource, as you know. And when you said that we need time, we need to develop ideas, and that's a process that takes time. But at the same time, knowledge, as you said in your book, knowledge increasingly the half-life of knowledge is reducing.
Yes.
So we have a period of accelerated change, and at the same time we need time. How do we deal with that?
It's a good question, sometimes the things that we need to develop are the structures, right? So there's two things that are involved here. One is the structure that helps us to make sense of new information. And that's something that we always need to be working on. So even if the information is changing, the way that we interact and handle that information, we need to have some structure to it so that we are taking the time to reflect and to think deeply about those topics. The information, it's the relevance of different types of information changes too. I mean, if you're, for example, technology, computers, that changes very quickly. But if you're, and we all have these parts of these nodes of knowledge in our networks where some are going to be obsolete more quickly than others will be. There's the information node. So if you're in computer science, you're going to have a lot of your conceptual knowledge changing continually. If you're taking something like, I don't know, let's say culinary arts, it's been a long time since we found a new animal to kill and grill, right? So that's going to change much slower. So I think it's not all information is equal in terms of its variability. But in all cases, we need two things. One is the structure that we use to make sure that we're giving information coming in the appropriate consideration it needs. And the second is the ability to think about that information critically and how it relates to what we currently know in other systems.
Yes, I bring this up because one of the things that we discuss a lot is how students don't reflect.
Yeah.
And we criticize students a lot because they don't take the time to reflect. But at the same time, we're saying you got to be ready because change is around the corner. So, yeah. I mean, it's a mixed message, a contradictory message that we send students most of the time.
Yeah, no, I agree it is. And that's why what you want to do, I think, is make sure that what you're thinking about and reflecting about is the structure that you use to take incoming information. And I have a post, now maybe I'll bring it up in the afternoon, where I look at how I manage information, and it just looks at, what do I do when I get new information? How do I filter it? What do I do with it? Because the information is going to change all the time, but I need a framework to capture that. Like you're saying, we want students to think deeply about it, but we might not necessarily have that information going to be obsolete in a year's time. So we always need to be simultaneously improving our framework for information handling as well as the nature of information handling that leads to knowledge.
So could we say that that framework is what somewhat you refer in your book as the line becoming more important than the content of the line?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks.